So welcome to today's webinar, everyone. My name is Paul Dunet. I will be your host and moderator. Today's webinar is on how to create a cultural model for effective social media management. And this webinar is brought to you by Social Media Today and our sponsor, LiveWorld. Now, before we get started, I wanted to let you know we are recording today's webinar. We will post a recap to the Social Media Today blog with key takeaways and a link to the replay, a copy of the slides, everything you could possibly want. So just sit back, relax, and join in today's conversation. Now, there are really two ways for you to join in today's conversation, and that is via Twitter using the hashtag SMTLive, again, hashtag SMTLive, or via the GoToWebinar control panel. I will be monitoring both of these channels, looking for your questions and getting them in front of our speakers. So let's go ahead and introduce today's speakers. Today we have Augie Ray, seasoned social media professional. We've got Jason Moriber, Senior Digital Strategist at Verizon, Peter Friedman, the CEO of LiveWorld, and myself, Paul Dunet, your host and moderator. Now our first speaker is going to be Peter, and Peter's going to talk us through social media is a party. So Peter, why don't you take it away?
Okay, thanks very much, Paul. Well, this first slide is a photograph of a communal taxi cab in Havana, Cuba, and you may wonder, well, what does that have to do with social media? Well, it's a really good example because in Havana and Cuba, you know, they've had this whole revolution, and it's very poor, but the people are very connected to the sense of the Cuban revolution and culture. But they're so poor, they have to share cabs coming and going to work. And the cab driver actually takes people, hawks them into the cab, organizes them, which provides a context for conversational programming. And then the people talk to each other about everything in their lives they've never met before, but they're able to connect and they learn about each other. And the key thing is that the topic is social. It's about the people. And this is what social media has. You really want to create a cultural context that allows for true conversational programming, not broadcast products, and have that topic be about people, and then they'll connect with each other and connect with you. And if we move to the next slide, the metaphor we've developed for this for a brand is, what is your social media party online? The party is your online presence. And depending on your brand, it could be very edgy, you know, MTV or something like that, very family-oriented Disney, very kind of professional business networking American Express. It could be any kind of a party. And you really have to think about that in terms of your brand values and what the customers will expect, because they're going to experience your brand more through their interactions in this party with each other than through anything else you do. And you don't want your party, next slide, to look like this. At least most people don't, because your customers will expect that your on-page experience is what your in-store or with product or with service will be. We had one client in the quick service industry who had very, very edgy content, but it was quite raucous, and teen boys were getting quite raucous. And we said, look, if you want families to show up at your quick service restaurant and think your party's a rave, you're great. But they didn't. So the party effect, unintentionally, of their brand was at odds with what experience they wanted to create for their customers, and they really had to change it. So let's go to an actual sort of full case study. Next slide, please, which is Zoetis, which is the largest animal drug company in the world, $4.5 billion, used to be Pfizer Animal Health, but spun off and created a whole other brand, Zoetis, that they needed to establish. And since their products are sold through veterinarians and distributors, they're not in touch with the end customer as much, and they want it to be. So we worked with them with a cultural model, next slide please, for their horse business, and created a page called EQ Stable on Facebook. And for them, through a whole workshop and everything, we worked out that their party for horses is a barbecue at a rodeo. And that has all kinds of nuances for how their customers relate to each other, what they care about, and it really shows that the brand understands them. And if we move to the next slide, here you'll notice that their top posts have a social focus. It's not about the drugs, it's not about the brand, it's about what's of interest to the customers. And Tina here in the upper left is actually one of their people. She's in there a lot talking about horses and what she does and how she loves them. Even celebrity spokesmen like Sam Elliott, it's not buy the product, it's what are we all about. And every so often we slip in a message about this particular animal drug or what they need or a vet tip. And what happens is people really get connected, and they become a real community, and they go, this brand really understands me, and I have friends at this brand like Tina, and they made Sam Elliott human. And all this makes you loyal to the brand and want to buy their products. And if we go to the next slide, they have significant ROI out of this model. They launched the program. They wanted to get about 100,000 fans, and they did that in just a month or two. And they today have about 18% engaged, and that's fluctuated from 15 to almost 30%. And anything over like 5 to 10% for something of this size is just like phenomenal. Really huge ones won't even get 2%. So by doing this approach, they got a great deal of engagement, lots of comments, lots of stories, thousands and thousands of images, which are really from the customers. And one of their key ROI measures was to build up a database of end customer names because they didn't have it. And they found this is the most cost-effective way of doing it, a fraction of the next most cost-effective way, which is search. And then from a sentiment point of view, pharma companies generally don't have very good sentiment. And so for them to have, as you'll see here, 50% positive, 49% neutral, and only 1% negative, again, is almost unheard of in the pharma business. And the reason is because they've made a party that resonates with their customer with a cultural model, with context and conversational programming. Just like a party you'd go to, you want it to be, you meet lots of other people that are interesting, not hear the host talk about themselves. So that's our case study there. And another question that's come up a lot, next slide, is how do you do this on a global basis with lots of languages? So we've created a case study here, which is a true story. We've just disguised it by merging all the CPG companies in the world. Next slide. But it's actually one of the top CPG companies. And you see the companies always have lots of brands in lots of places. If we go to the next slide, they're on lots of different social channels. Nothing's coordinated. Then there's next slide, lots of languages. And on top of that, they got PR agencies, digital agencies, social agencies everywhere. And this is the challenge of like, how do you scale that? So what we did with them is we developed a global program, next slide please, to actually drive this cultural model at scale. We templated the process, streamlined it so all the different brand groups can write out their objectives and the target market, the guidelines, what kind of content, what kind of budget. That actually cut the starting process by over 100 hours. And then we use a platform that happens to be ours, but it pulls all the content into one shared workflow process, which our next build allows the labor to be shared. So as an example, instead of 10 brands in English in 10 countries, each doing 6 hours a day separately, they all combine it to one process, and they only do 24 hours a day. So they're able to spend 1/3 the money, 24 hours instead of 60, but each brand gets 24 hours of coverage. And yet the model is built so you can have a global model for leverage, but the programming will be tailored. This allows you to take a party, the other things our panelists are going to talk about today, and really scale it around the world by taking a global platform model to the process as well as the technology, but design it so it can be tailored by brand, project, country. And this saves this particular company over $10 million a year. And we have clients using this kind of thing, saves them millions to tens of millions by simply being organized about it with this party model in mind. And now back to you, Paul.
Yeah, no, very cool, Peter. I really appreciate it, and certainly they're having a party out on Twitter talking about this. In case you missed the hashtag, I got a couple questions asking for the hashtag. It's SMT Live. Again, SMT Live. Or if you have a question, you can just pop it into the GoToWebinar control panel. So we're going to turn it over to Jason, who's going to talk to us about how Verizon organizes for social at scale. Can you take it away, Jason?
Yes, I can. Can everyone hear me okay? Is Paul ask you?
Yeah, great.
Thank you. So, the last speaker was talking about, the activations, that this is the campaigns that happen externally. And here at Verizon, and Verizon Wireless specifically, where we have lots of teams and lots of agendas, what we had to do to even get to that place is organize ourselves internally, culturally, to say, okay, well, are we aligned internally before we even go out to the world for social? How are we all going to work together? And so we did a bit of an audit. We had lots of conversations. Again, we're a huge enterprise. And so we came we landed on a shared objective. And that's the slide that you see here. So in the past, I think what you see on the left, it replicates as you have business initiatives and business objectives, and you had marketing and PR, you had all these different teams that wanted to say something and do something on social, as well as they had just general campaigns that we had on television, radio, and just in different media. And what we found is that they just weren't aligned. And mostly they were aligned is because, well, my team has my objective and your team has your objective, and from a social space, you know, we have maybe have a different audience than you, and we're just going to go out there and push it. We're just going to go do it no matter what. And what we agreed on, again, culturally, internally, so we could even really be clear with our audiences and really listen well to our customers, is we need to get towards the right, which was is we'd all need to be building lift. Yes, we'll always have campaigns that exist, and there'll always be these business priorities of having to do something by a certain date. You know, again, so for us, and we're, you know, in the mobile industry, things are very day to day, and we're always looking at, we're very metrics driven. With very competitive environment. So again, we have lots of spikes. We have lots of folks that are just like, let's do something now. But even while that's going to happen, we needed to make sure that all these teams said, yeah, okay, we can always going to do that, but we need to get this lift. We need to have this sort of always on, steady objective to make sure that when it comes to social, we don't look like multi-personalities. That we continue to look like the same company in the world. We sound the same. We look the same. And our customers can say, all right, that's something we expect from that brand. So that's this slide. And we sort of keep this up on our wall, so we just all sort of know, right, okay, I feel the pressure to do something, do that quick campaign, but right, my goal is to create lift for the brand. So when I get to social, I'm thinking lift. So the next slide, please. So we then modified the adoption curve, the technology adoption curve, and I put some examples on the bottom of the slide for you guys because different folks use them in different ways. Jeffrey Moore has his crossing the chasm, but we said, okay, we're a technology company, so let's adopt this curve. And so when we're going to go out to do social, we're going to go out to talk to our audiences, let's plot those messages along this map. And the map kind of moves from left to right. So if you imagine you want to spark ideas, then you want to seed ideas, then you want to share news, you want to drive people towards that purchase, that's our goal as a retail organization. We then want to sustain the message, hey, this is really great, and then we want to be a support mechanism for our customers that have bought our services. And all this has to happen in social. All this does happen in social, but in the past, again, like that previous slide, maybe each of these parts of this map were in different pieces, and maybe we do a whole lot of news, like we drop a lot of news, but it wasn't tied to our support team and what they would have to do once that news was launched. You know, our sales team might be doing these promotions, but it wasn't attached to the news and it wasn't attached to what support needed to do. So we borrowed this, you know, adoption curve, and we said, okay, now when we go out and we're going to do social activations, if I'm going to do something further upstream, let's say, something I want to seed new ideas into the market, I want to talk about our innovation, is that going to be tied to news? Is that tied to our purchase and our sales team? Is that tied to our support team? So now that when we do these social activations, culturally as an organization, we are aligned. We say, okay, here's the map. Let me make sure that when I do something, I'm looking up and down this map to make sure that I'm aligning and getting my other teammates involved, so that when I do that social campaign, as previous presenter shared, all my teams are aware, they're all ready, they can participate, they're all at the table at the beginning, and we can all sort of have that shared success. Now, that's really great to say out loud. Then what happens when you try to do that? That's the next slide. I'll give you an example. What happens, what we ended up having to do is build, excuse me, something based off the squad model. I don't know if you guys know about the squad model. Spotify uses it. Different tech companies use this, where rather than it being a hierarchy of how is social going to be done at this company, we do it pretty flat and through, I guess, what you'd call a hierarchy, where we're all in different teams, we all have different roles. And it's agile and it moves around. So rather than saying, hey, this one group of people, that's the social team, and they are always going to do it, what we try to do is really be agile and say, okay, for this campaign or for this initiative or for this thing, who are the best people, what's the best team, and can we get them together? And so what we kind of end up with are these bubbles that tend to overlap. It looks a little bit like a lava lamp in practice when you do these processes, but you tend to have a group towards analytics, those folks that are really going to measure and monitor and make sure we're doing doing great work. You have that strategy team, that leadership, okay, here's the campaign and how's it going to work across all these different functions. And then you have this other team, which we call the creative engagement team. These are the folks that might typically you call community managers or your content team. These are the folks that are going to, what is the campaign? What is our social activation? How does it work across the enterprise? What are we going to say? What does it look like? And stuff like that. And we find that some of those folks also sit in the analytics team, some of them are on the strategy team, some people sit in all three. And again, depending on the campaign and what we're doing, we'll put a smaller group of people together to do something. So it's not always the same thing every time. Again, when you have the map like we have, where it's really across a large organization and a lot of customer touch points, it can't just be one small pocket of folks. It has to be people all across the organization. And so we use this, again, culturally. How do we get ready for socials? We make sure that we have the great pool of people, a lot of great skill sets from sitting all across the organization, so that when we get out there to social, it's fully robust, it's fully informed, and it's really representative of who we are. So that's my little bit there about how we do it here at Verizon Wireless.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I love it, Jason. I love that idea of the squad model and it being sort of agile, and you're able to cobble them together. I think that's applicable in multiple areas of marketing, but certainly in social, it's a great concept. Okay, well, keep those questions coming. I've assembled a bunch already, and thank you very much for the folks who have already started to pile in on questions. We've got Augie Ray, who's going to be our last speaker before we get into Q&A. And Augie is going to share some personal experiences organizing for social at a past employer. So, Augie, are you there? Take it away.
I'm here. Thank you very much. I like to start when talking about culture, not essentially with social media, but much higher in the ladder. And so I really love this quote from Peter Drucker, Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast. And I think it has never been more true than it is today. We live, as we all know, in a period of transparency. And if you buy into that, then the only real strategic difference between you and your competition is your corporate culture. Products can be duplicated, and strategies can be borrowed, and employees can be stolen. But in an era of transparency, your corporate culture is the differentiator. And so one of the things that I like to point out is that USA had a very inspirational culture. I really should mention, comment on my current employer. I'm not an official spokesperson, so I can't do so. But luckily, I have this great experience at USAA and can share my personal observations about it. And I'd like to tell a little story about how USAA creates its culture and ultimately how that then gets reflected into social media. So on the next slide, what we talk about here is that it really starts with something. The USAA does not have a culture by accident. They have it by design, and it starts with their mission statement. And of course, lots of companies have mission statements, and they get put into a book or they get put onto a wall, and nobody pays any attention to them. But USAA makes sure that people know the mission statement. It gets reinforced all the time. You can stop an employee in the hallway at USAA, ask them to recite the mission, and they can do it. It is deeply embedded into their culture. And of course, this is a pretty special mission statement. It's differentiated. I mean, I see so many mission statements where companies are saying that they just want to do the same thing as everybody else. This is an inspiring mission statement. I'm going to talk a little bit about the ways that it is inspired on my next slide. But one of the things I really loved about USAA is the way they make this mission real. It gets repeated before employee meetings, for instance. I sat in meetings where people would talk about or debate an idea or a concept or a program, and one of the questions that would get asked is, does it serve the mission? I've never been in an employer that question like that was asked, and where they would literally make decisions to go or no go based on whether it fit the mission. The other thing that I love to share about that makes USAA, I think, special is that oftentimes companies have a purpose or they have a mission statement, but at the end of the day, when you sit down to talk about how are we doing this quarter or this year, the results that get shared look like everybody else's results, your typical sort of approach to financial results. At USAA, the employee meetings, when they are sharing their results, they don't start with the financial results. They start with how are we doing to our corporate mission. And they spend some time talking about that. And then they get around to, and of course we have financial results to share. But the message is really clear, which is at USAA you are part of something important. You're expected to live up to these ideals. And we have faith, we being both the leadership team and of course the company will in fact succeed financially. And so it gets reinforced not simply by saying here's our mission, but in the actions of the leaders when they are reporting their results. So on the next slide, one of the things that I think is really notable is that obviously you need to make your culture real to people. And how do you communicate that? Well, one of the ways that USAA does that is really remarkable is that every employee, no matter at what level they are, their entire first week is in a new employee orientation. And of course, some companies have some version of this, although usually not a week long. And the way that USAA makes its culture real to people who are new to this company is really extraordinary. On the left is a meal ready to eat. It is what soldiers use in the field, and one day lunch at USAA during NEO is served from this meal ready to eat, and you've got to, open the packages and heat up the food and eat the Chef Boyardee-like things. And it isn't all that tasty, to be perfectly honest, and there was a lot of arguments that were started on at our table about who is going to get the bag of M&Ms that is included in the meal ready to eat. But it helps to make real what people who serve in our military and are served by USAA really go through. So that is one way that they make it real. The other, and it's represented by that envelope, and this is a very emotional sort of exercise. On the third day, everyone's gotten to know each other. They're feeling pretty relaxed. They're having lunch together, and you come back, and the door flies open, and in walks a former sergeant, drill sergeant, I believe he was, and he yells attention, and everyone stands up. Now, some of the people that you have started with in this training group are former military, so they, of course, know it, and others, like myself, were not. But we all know what to do when somebody yells attention, and we all stood up. And each of us got an envelope. And what we were doing was an exercise where we were taking on a persona of one of USAA's customers, or members, as they call them. And what you were getting was your marching orders. You are going to deploy it in 1 week to a very dangerous part of the world, and you are going to be there for some time, and you don't know how long you're going to be there. And you have to decide, are you and your family ready? And so some of the people in this personas were unmarried and dating somebody and living with their parents, and some were a little older and newlyweds, and some were even older and had kids. And you have to go through a checklist. Do people know where all their important papers are? Does your spouse or your parents or your loved ones know, where what your account numbers are? What are you doing with your car? Are you storing it or are you selling it? Have you thought about the insurance needs on it? What happens if you don't return? Are you protected? Is your family protected for that outcome? And it was a very emotional place to put yourself, and it made you appreciate what people in the military go through, and the idea of having to leave your family, and not just the emotional aspects, but even the practical financial aspects. So I'll just end by saying that NEO was a week long, and there wasn't a day in new employee orientation at USAA where I didn't have tears in my eyes. That is how inspiring it is to work at USAA and to understand that you serve somebody who deserves the best you can give. And in fact, by the end of NEO, it is not an exaggeration to say that people were really eager to get into their jobs because they knew that they had people they needed to serve who deserved everything they could bring that job. And that's part of how USAA brings this culture real. So on the last slide, I just want to talk very briefly then about social media, because it doesn't do you any good to create a culture and then not project it internally, project it externally. And so one of the things that you noticed about USAA's mission is that they talk about serving the needs of others. And so they went into social media not to market themselves. That was not the first goal and never has been the first goal of USAA. It wasn't to expand their reach necessarily. It was because they know that people needed service there and they had questions there. And so the primary reason that USAA entered social media was to answer questions, and that's represented up at the top left. And of course, to help people prepare, one of the things that they do is as natural disasters are occurring and can be planned for, like a hurricane that's coming, or if there's a very severe storm that's forecast, they're helping people to remind them what to do. Charge your phones, download your USAA app, be prepared for it. But I think one of the things that represents culture, both in social media and at USAA the best, is this last example, the one on the bottom. There was a very sad event when I was at USAA. There was a crash of a helicopter in Afghanistan, and 38 service members lost their life. It's hardly the sort of thing that most companies would even consider addressing in any way in social media. media, but because USA has this strong culture, and because it is part of a community, and because it serves people, the question was never, do we not say anything? The question was, what do we say, and how do we say it in a way that allows us to express that we are part of this culture? And so this comment was made, and it's not about social media marketing here. It's not even about service. What it is about being part of the community, because that is part and parcel of the USAA culture. As you can see, it resonated with people. There were a lot of people who clicked the like button, but that wasn't the reason that we on the social media team made this comment. It was because we felt obligated to, and that tells you how important the culture is of USAA. So thank you very much for sitting through my story.
Oh, that's perfect, Augie. That's some amazing details that you've got on that, and I really appreciate you sharing all that. Well, we're going to drop into Q&A now, folks. If you've got questions, please let me know. Drop them either into the GoToWebinar control panel or to Twitter. I'm looking there for our questions. And we've got one that I want to start with from Dan Cropsey around, can you share what companies need to do to prepare to extend their culture into social media? I think maybe the assumption was that, here are these brands and they're already extending into social media. I guess Dan is looking to figure out how to. Maybe we can start with Peter and then move on to Jason and Augie. So Peter, can you talk to us a little bit about maybe what you've seen and how companies are preparing to share their culture and expose themselves a little bit more in the right way, obviously, on social media?
Well, I think the big issue for most brands, at least large brands, is that they're used to 60 years here of a broadcast product message mentality where everything's in control. So this is a real shift. And if you look at the 5,000-year history of business, it's not a shift, because from the Roman forums to medieval marketplaces to general stores with chairs in front, sales and marketing was about getting people together and having conversations and seeing what they were about. Along the way, you built relationships and loyalty. The last 60 years is aberrant in the history of business, but not for the people who are in business today. So you really have to pull back and say, who are my customers? What are they about? What are they caring about? What do they want to talk about each other? How can I make myself part of them and their story? And then that goes into our party model. We actually conduct a whole strategic workshop for companies to help them make this kind of a shift. And I think in order to do it, it really takes a leader, somebody in the C-suite, probably the CMO, say, look, we're going to change here. We're going to do it this way. And our culture and our measures are used to what's a great ad or a great new website. We've got to shift and praise people for supporting ongoing conversations with customers about customers.
Okay, all right. Jason, can you talk to us about Verizon a little bit? It might be maybe prior to you joining or something like that, where they thought about how their culture would extend into social media. Have you made some advancements in that area that we should know about?
Yeah, and so I have one quick question for the person that asked the question. Again, I can talk from a large enterprise. I don't know. I can also help answer from a smaller operation. So I'll answer from large enterprise right now, but if you want me to get smaller, I can do that too.
Yeah, that's kind of the next question, so we'll get to that in a second from Christopher Farrell out there. So hang on, Chris. We'll get there in a second. Okay,
so I'll answer from a Verizon Wireless perspective.
Yes, please.
And so it may sound funny, but the way similar. I guess it was Augie who discussed is you need to find that executive sponsorship for sure. But I think what we had to do is we had to tie everything back to business goals that those other teams use. So for us, it was all about the KPIs. So the way that we could extend social was to move it from just the language of social and move into the language of the business. And when we could do that, when we could map these, okay, we take this initiative on social, it maps back to your business priority from the marketing team or from the finance team or something like that. Then they all went, aha, now I see what this thing means. Now I understand how this works. So rather than, I think when I first started, I really wanted to bring all of these executives to the social space. And really what ended up happening is I ended up having to bring the social space through the filter that they would understand. And that took some time. It doesn't happen overnight. And there's each of those different leads, those different lines of business have a very different vocabulary and different understanding. But for us, it really was taking something as simple as, hey, when we do this campaign, it's going to impact your metrics this way, A, B, and C.
So it sounds like you got a couple of key, influencers or something within the organization to get them to stand up to be the individuals that would essentially pilot the way that it would roll out. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. So most of those folks were. It's sort of the middle, up and down. So if you imagine again a large organization, those folks in the middle were the real movers and shakers, or the ones that really would sell up and share up, and then they were the ones that would train the teams those that were either in the seats for social, or we call them frontline employees here. So training our frontline employees to do better. Yes.
Interesting. Now, Augie, with you, it sounds like let's just take the USAA example a little bit more in depth. It sounds like they were really well organized, culture-wise, mission-wise. It also reminded me a little bit of that book by Simon Sinek, Start with the Why. I often love listening to him as far as having a very strong raison d'etre or a why there. It sounds like because they were so well organized in that sense that moving that and translating that into social was a lot easier. Is that a fair statement?
It is a fair statement, and we still had to work through, of course, the usual regulatory and compliance issues. But it was really funny and startling. I was at Forrester, and a lot of people were surprised that I had left as soon as I did. But you just made the case for why I did. I said to myself, when am I going to get the opportunity to run social media at a company that so innately gets it? It was formed by the community. It was literally formed. USA was formed when a couple of officers who were having trouble getting auto insurance in the 1920s because they moved around too much, and insurance companies had a hard time tracking people that moved around a lot in the pre-computer days, literally tossed money in a hat and said, let's all insure each other. And that's, so it's really a collaborative economy business model that it still exists here 90 years later. And so when I got there, they already had a lot in place, which was fabulous. They certainly had leaders that were supportive, and in fact, in the 2 months before my arrival, it was very interesting, and it tells you, you're going to think I had the easiest job in the world, and maybe I did, but the CEO of the company, who didn't know a tweet or post from anything, had identified that he wanted to spend time with the social media team, and he actually set aside 3 one-hour sessions so that he could see and learn what social media was about. And so it was really interesting to me. I started, it was very fertile ground. They were very interested. We still had to do a lot of work around organization and care and compliance and strategy, and all that went very well. But it was interesting to me that about 6 months after I started, that same CEO, and I'd certainly had interactions with him. It wasn't like we were best friends or that I was in his office every other week or anything, but he knew what we were doing, was very proud of what we were doing, but he stood on stage and, unbeknownst to me, without warning, announced to the entire employee audience that social media was the company's future, and that as a community-based company that he saw this as so important. And to me, that speaks to that whole chain of culture and where social media can and cannot fit sometimes within an organization.
Wow, I mean, that's rare that the CEO gets that deeply engaged. Normally there's some sort of, critical, thing that happens in social. I'm thinking of like the Dominos Pizza thing with the video of people putting cheese up their nose, that sort of deal. And all of a sudden the CEO is super interested in social and wants to hang out with the social media group. So very interesting from that perspective. All right, let's change gears a little bit. Let's get to Christopher Farrell's question. And this is a little bit more aimed at Jason and maybe Augie than Peter, but we'll start maybe with Jason. He's talking about the fact that Verizon, sells a product, and you connect through Verizon services, and it's a direct connection with the brand. What about when you have an intermediary, or you're selling through channels? I guess is the better way of saying that. Are there any recommendations about how to create a strategy, a community strategy between manufacturers and their retail partners? Jason, I don't know if maybe you've seen this in your trails, and then maybe we'll go to Augie.
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple different strategies. So one is you could become, so let's say you're the manufacturer and you have the salespeople or the organization that's the buffer between you and the customers. So one is you could become the best intelligence group that's feeding that intelligence to that in between. So you say, okay, maybe we're not going to be the face on social, but we're going to make sure our partners have the best face possible, and then we're giving them the information so they could be successful. So we're providing them with the talking points, the strategies. We're really trying to empower them to be the best. And then in that way, you're acting as an umbrella, so you're sharing that similar information across all your different partners so they can all sort of be a wall of sound for you with their customers. So that's sort of one approach. The other approach is you become a resource on social. This might be more of a content strategy concept, but one you could do is you become a resource for the public so that when that customer, when that customer is looking to that sales organization and saying, oh, I want to buy this product, let me go look them up. When they go look them up, they're going to see your engagement around certain topics that could be have authority in. So again, let's just say you're SCA Americas, and you make all those napkins that are in stadiums and in restaurants and et cetera. So you don't sell directly to so you sell directly to McDonald's, and then McDonald's will have your napkins. So this may sound funny, but the notion is that when someone looks at that napkin, they go, oh, I wonder who this is, and they look it up, they'll then go see you as an authority talking about paper, recycling, sustainability, the earth, trees, that sort of thing. And so maybe you're not speaking about food and food services and that aspect from your social, but you're talking about these sort of key thought leadership things that you can do, which would add an umbrella to that engagement. Quickly, those are sort of two ways of doing it.
Yeah, so it almost seems like a content hub for partners, sort of a hub and spoke thing, or becoming a resources for customers, and then maybe hub and spoking them out to potential partners. Sort of two different ways to skin the cat. Augie, any words of advice from maybe your former days at Forrester, where you might have seen a little bit more of a channel-oriented social media strategy?
Yeah, obviously USAID is all direct, so they probably aren't the best example. I'll mention I have a couple of former employers I can reference, and Prudential is one of them. And one of the smart things that I saw Prudential do, and can give a little bit of a shout out to a company named Peoplelink. And what Peoplelink does is they have a platform for helping to train and track what people are doing in social media. And so they wanted to. Prudential didn't take it as an assumption, nor should anyone, that if they get their channel partners or salespeople online and in social media, that they will just gravitate to social and do the right thing. And so what Peoplelink has is a platform where you can customize training for everyone. People can compare how they're doing against each other. You can tell them to follow 10 people with a VP title and this word in their title, for instance. And you can track the people who do this, and you essentially help them step by step to embrace social media and to create their social profile in a way that is both compliant and will help them in the future. And this was one way that Prudential was working through their channel partners and offering this as a service so that people could do a better job of doing the social selling and the relationship building that they needed to. It's really kind of a cool little platform. People can see their score versus other people, so there's a little bit of a gamification play to it. And meanwhile, Prudential could track how individuals were doing and see whether or not there are people who needed specific additional support.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the shout out. Peter, any thoughts about a channel-oriented strategy? Have you seen anyone in your trails that's potentially doing that?
Well, it's really it's kind of a complex problem because as the two other fellows have talked about, you've got these multiple levels of constituency. I'd actually say think about the party at each level. The way I think you can do it, I'll harken all the way back to my days at Apple, where we had one of the original sort of online social networks called Applelink, and it was the Apple industry community. And what we did is we created sort of a master brand level of experience at Apple, and then allowed the dealers and the developers to create their own subset communities that worked under that. So you give them the larger level of the brand and the general stuff and the conversation tone, maybe the defined party, but then you let them bring themselves forward and what's interesting about them, and the ones that do it well, you praise them and put a light on them. Now another example would be a very large retailer we work with that has thousands of locations, and they're one of the biggest companies in the world. And we often talk in social media about how a little company can take on the big guys. Well, social media also lets a big company become personal and local. So here, you have to have your sort of national strategy, your core cultural model that cuts across everything, content and conversations apply to everybody, but then create a structure in which your sort of local car franchises, or in this case stores, can bring up the local local sensibility, because everything's kind of local. You know, they say all politics is local, and all conversations are local. And local can be topic relevant or geographic relevant. And you don't want to be doing things at a national brand level that may get by what's going on locally. And if the conversation is about people, and you've got people in your retail stores or your auto franchise or even your regional market of the animal drug company, you want to bring those people forward who know the people in their region. So again, I think you want to create a structure where you're giving your dealers or your stores or your regions, you know, global and national leverage in the conversation, but then empowering them and making them part of it so they become very personable, because they're part of the communities that they live in. And if you bring your community, your local community, into the social dialogue, then you're bringing your customers into it, and you're making them yourself part of their lives at a very local and personal level that typically national and global brands can't do, but social media allows them to do it.
Okay. All right. Let's take a turn in a different direction. I'm getting some questions about scale. And Peter, I think you talked about this in one of your slides about how do you scale that? And the question actually comes from Brad Smith around the idea of, you know, we just had Black Friday, Cyber Monday. You know, how do you prepare to scale for these sort of, let's say, spike moments where customer conversations may be surging? Can you talk a little bit about that, and then maybe we'll ask Jason and Augie to comment as well?
Okay, well that's a really current example for me, because we have multiple clients, including that really big retailer, who, you know, that's the biggest time of the year for them. And in one case, we have many, many tens of thousands of comments coming through over a 24-hour period. And many companies say, well, we just can't deal with it, so don't do it. We have to deal with it because it's going to happen with or without you. Or they want to lean to some sort of all automated way, and this kind of goes with, you know, programmatic advertising and all that. And we think that's a huge mistake. Not that you can't use technology, I'll come back to that. But social media is a human form, so you have to find a way of dealing with human stuff. And also, the best technology misses a lot of stuff, and you can't risk that either. Now, in our case, what we do is we use software, mostly our own, not always, but mostly our own, that doesn't replace people, but makes the people faster. It lets them go very quickly. It organizes it, prioritizes it. It helps say, you know, what am I going to get to first, and then track and manage it all. But very important that you train people up to be kind of little talk show hosts for you and do real engagement with them. You can do it. I think what you have to do is have a good strategy model. So it's there's a sort of cultural foundation, like we heard about at Verizon for alignment and USAA. You know, that core mission, you have to have that in your people. And it could be inside people, it could be your agencies, but you have to be clear on what that is. And then you empower and train people to run with it without too much control, because they don't have time to be controlled when this is happening so fast. And we have seen in our work, in studies from other people and our own tracking, the more you have personal engagement, the more loyalty and sales result. So I think you have to be prepared to ramp people up for big times, but you do that by having a good year-round model, not a campaign mentality, but an ongoing model in place. And then you train people a lot, and then so they know what to do, and then you give them tools that help them do it, but don't rely on automation to engage with your customers, because that's not going to get you the social effect you want.
Don't rely on automation. Interesting. All right, Jason, let's talk about it a little bit from a Verizon perspective. I mean, do you use that, let's say, that squad model to potentially organize at, you know, peak times?
That's a good question. I mean, Peter, that was very thorough. And I probably would have said all the same things. But here, I'll try to find a couple. So let's just talk about the holidays. there's many teams. So we can talk about just the marketing initiative. You can talk about customer support. You can talk about comms. You can talk about sales. So they each have different ways that they scale. So this communications would be the training, sort of like Peter was saying. We want to make sure that all of our staff are trained that even if they're not social media rock stars, they can lend a hand when we need them to. They can jump in and be supportive. From a marketing standpoint, they're just getting those teams super ready. And like Peter was saying, they're using software to help them be intelligent. They're trying to figure out what is a real engagement versus what might be spam. And software is really going to help them. So for their scale, they are relying sort of on the robots to help them understand that. I would even put customer support in that. They're using software too. I mean, they can't, we have a huge customer support team and all of them are on social. There's 50 plus people that are doing social. And we think we got it. I think it's a question of being smart and being agile. So we don't put the squad model to scale. We use that to be proactive. So we use those squad models to make sure that everyone's aligned. So I, as a customer support person, will know what marketing is going to do. We'll know what the comms approach is going to be. We'll understand our salespeople better so that when we do get to those moments where we have to scale, again, sort of like Peter was saying, was done in advance. It's not that campaign. It's always going on, so that everyone sort of knows what their role is, the swim lane, how it goes. And so we do a lot of, I forget what the quote is. It's either a general or a president or someone said, you know, a plan is okay, but planning, always be planning. Planning is better. So we're always planning. Even if we don't necessarily have a plan, we're always trying to just be in the right place at the right time.
Kind of reminds me in a different way of another quote. What is it? Everyone's got a strategy until you get punched in the face.
Yes.
And there you have it.
That's really great because, you know, you're going to have crises and problems. It's not that social media is creating them. It's just like letting you know they're really there. And sometimes to this question of how to handle spikes and peaks and things, it's like, what happens when something goes wrong? Well, you can't figure it out then. You have to have a plan ahead of time. You need friends when you're in a crisis. In social media, you don't make friends in the middle of a crisis. Almost the same thing you just said. You have to do it ahead of time.
Right. Okay, we're getting a little short on time, so I'm going to advance us to sort of the next topic. And a lot of questions that I got are around content, creating engaging content. One from Camera Lewis sort of kicked it off, and I want to give her a shout out around, you know, what can agencies do to create engaging content for their audience? I also got some questions about small businesses. Let's see, that came from Prinz Law Firm, a branded handle. And so any thoughts around the creation of engaging content? I think it's an area that we probably need to touch on here. And let's see, Augie, do you want to kick that off for us?
I will. I'm going to be a little contrarian, though, and I'll move out of the way for somebody who's maybe a little less so. I'm of the opinion that we have oversold some respects the value of content. Now, obviously, everyone needs content, and so, you know, I don't want to take this too far or be too general. But, you know, I'll often ask people to add up the number of brands they have in their lives, add up the number in your closet, in your refrigerator, in your kitchen cupboard, in your bathroom, on your devices, in your car. You know, just a rough estimate. You know, most people say it's 500, 600 brands in their life. And how many of those do you want to consume content from? How many of those do you really want a relationship with? And the point isn't that social isn't important. Obviously, it's important, and relationships are vitally important. But they are at the discretion of the customer, not at the discretion of the brand. And so, one of the things that I think we can do with content is to focus less on broadcasting and more on being prepared for all the questions that we know that we're going to get, so we can respond in a timely manner and in a valuable manner to what the needs of the customer are, instead of what our own needs are to be talked about. And so it's one of the things that I always try to bring to my jobs is that people aren't signing on to social media to talk to us. They just aren't. If we're going to do something that's really valuable, it's got to be really valuable and not just simply, you know, viral or marketing-y. And I'll say one last thing and then move out of the way for somebody to make maybe a more positive statement. But you know, we still see agencies and we still see marketers really interested in viral success. But if you look at last year's most viral brand video was Kmart's "Shit My Pants" by far, leaps and bounds, and it didn't make any difference whatsoever to Kmart's continued decline. And so I think that we can sometimes put the wrong metrics ahead of what we need to get at, and we should remember that our job there in social media is to form relationships, not necessarily to be entertaining and funny and collect retweets and posts. So one of the things we did at USAA was really focused on what are the questions that we're going to get at time of year, events that are going on, crises. We also participated in crisis plans and crisis exercises. It was really interesting. When I was at USAA, they had a crisis exercise where they'd get everyone in a room. And one year, the crisis was, I'm not going to go into specifics, but had to do with, what if we hear this on social media? And the entire team, not just the social media team, had to be prepared for social media becoming part of that crisis. And so everything from crisis exercising to planning for the topics that we know people are going to bring to us, not the topics we wanted to bring to people, was a big part of the content planning at USAA.
Yeah, I love it. All we need is a good viral video. That'll fix everything. How many times have you heard that one? Hey, Jason, talk to us a little bit about content and content generation from your angle, and then we'll move to Peter.
Okay. So I agree with Augie about, and then my first slide showed that lift versus those spikes. So I agree with you entirely that we don't shoot for the viral. And let me be clear. There are going to be some marketing KPIs where that is something that they need to do. They need to get that reach and that awareness. The thing is, that's not the only thing you got to do. So from a content perspective, we do a lot of research and we do a lot of audience planning. So before we ever say anything, we want to make sure who our audience is it the audience we want to reach? There's so many facets. Different exercises you could do is you could do a persona exercise. Who are your 5 audience types, and and then go do the research and what do they expect from you as a brand. So as an example, like we could probably say lots of spectacular things as a brand, Verizon Wireless, but we don't because we're not only looking to make a spectacular impact, we're looking to really provide value to customers and speak with something that we have authority that people would expect from us, right? We can talk about technology and innovation, we can talk about the air, we can talk about these things and renewable resources, but it doesn't make sense for us to do these things that are spectacular and go viral because that's not really what we do even as a brand. We're really a support mechanism for everybody. So there is that seductiveness to want to get that spectacular, but we don't. But so just again, very fundamentally, we do social listening, we listen, we define our personas, we write content for those personas, we see, hey, did they like that? Did they go and read that? Did they share it? Did they not share it? So we're always looking for the right audience and the right message. One quick thing that we learned is there's folks at times of change and churn will be the most vocal on social. And so there's this thing, I forget the term, it's called being open to the available narrative. So if I'm in a place of churn and change, I'm out there looking for narratives that are going to map to how I feel. And many times that's what ends up getting the attention, that drama, and that's what ends up going viral. It doesn't mean, like Augie was sort of saying, that that's the audience that we want for our brand. It doesn't mean that we're looking for people in times of churn and change. This is just one example. We might be looking for that satisfied customer, those people that are confident in what they've done, and how do we reach them? And so it might not get that spectacular result, but it's the content that we want to get to the people that are looking for that from us.
Right. It's a really good reminder. I love the words that you used around spectacular content. I mean, we've all seen, ads on the Super Bowl that, have great humor and virality to them, but no connection to the brand, and no one remembers who did that, such and so ad. And getting that connection is certainly key. Having those buyer personas definitely helps. Peter, I'm going to turn the question to you content-wise, but I'm going to twist it just slightly. Is there a balance between user-generated content and branded content that people should be looking at, people out there in the audience should be looking to create this great balance?
Well,
and if so, what do you recommend?
I think that's a good question. And I like, first of all, I don't think you guys are being contrarian at all. I kind of agree with it all. And I think this last point about TV kind of can get us there. Television developed and matured as a great marketing form for a certain number of decades when agencies and brands figured out how to make advertising that fit the context. I mean, TV is like, compelling videos, or, half hour, an hour long, or whatever. So we figured out how to make 15 to 60-second compelling videos. It kind of went. And search engines, when you go to a search engine, you go there to go someplace else. So they became a good advertising media forum when we all figured out how to do banners that would help you take someplace else, or Google AdWords or whatever. So you have to look at social media and this question of brand content and user content and the kind of content in the context of what the media form is. And I think that both Augie and Jason have said, what do your customers care about? They're not looking to watch a short video. I mean, they'll look at a video, but that's not why they're there. And they're not looking to be redirected somewhere else. That's not why they're there. Your customers are there for one of three reasons. These would be consumers, but there's a B2B version. They want to express themselves, share themselves. They want friends and dialogue with friends, and they want attention. Those are the benefits. And yeah, you can give them information, give them coupons. You can do that in any media form. That's not why they're there. They're there for these other core fundamental human things. So you have to create your content programming, your advertising, whatever, that gives them one or two or three of those benefits. And those things are more served by content about them and dialogue with each other than they are about content about the brand. And again, we want to talk about ourselves and make a big fancy graphical ad. But this is more reality TV, which I would like to point out, scales better and is more effective in television programming because people can relate to it. So the content has to be more user-centric. And you really want it to be mostly user content. If you look at the stats, it's like, many, many more billions of times more user content out there people are interacting with than brand content. So your brand content should be designed to stimulate user content. And not just liking your stuff or commenting on you, but talking to each other. So we divide it into three categories. Brand product content, category content, and social content. So if we were barbecues and we went, look at our Weber barbecue, $99.95, that's brand. And if we said, do you like gas or charcoal, that's category, that's topical. But if we said, on the 4th of July, you're going to barbecue blank, that's social, because that's about the user. And most brands start with 80 to 100% brand content and 0 social and category content. And it should be exactly the opposite. It should be like 40% social content that's all about the user, and they can do that for you. 40% category and only 20% about your brand. And if you do that, you'll attract more people to what you're doing. And it may seem counterintuitive, but talking about doing brand content less, and social content more, will draw more people that will see your brand content. And that's the nature of social. And if you do it really well, they'll amplify it themselves. They'll tell their own stories. Starbucks has a whole campaign called Meet Me at Starbucks, and Starbucks is there in the background. You see the coffee cups in the store. It's not about Starbucks. It's the stories of the customers' lives unfolding at Starbucks. And now the customers picked it up. I met my husband, look at my wedding picture. My charity group does this. Our computer group does that. We plan our business there. And then Starbucks doesn't have to create the content. They can just throw the spotlight on what their users are doing. So
excellent.
More social user content that drives users to create content, and less brand-centric content will actually build a more loyal audience, and then they'll love you and go buy your stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And I just want to add real quickly, I know we're running out of time here, but one of the things that social media people tend to be overlooking nowadays is that organic reach is dying. On Facebook, where the vast majority of social interactions happen, we're facing a situation where brand pages are going to literally have 0 reach within a year or two, meaning that what you post there will be seen by no one. If you look at any of the Forrester data on what's going on at Twitter, the interaction rate of the average brand post on Twitter is 75% less than the current click rate on banner ads, which should tell you how bad it is. And I just want to reinforce this theme that we need to get people talking to each other about our brands and giving them a reason to do it. And I'd argue that's done with experiences and not with content, although obviously content can be a part of experiences as well. But we ought to be really thinking about what social media looks like for brands in an age where nobody sees what you post unless you pay for it.
Excellent. Well, that's all the time we have really for questions today. I'd like to thank our sponsor, LiveWorld, and of course our speakers, Augie, Jason, Peter, for your time today. But I'd also like to thank everyone out there in our audience, right? You really help make this content come alive, and we love your questions, and we love getting them in front of our speakers. So thank you again for making the time for us today. We will see you again on Thursday for another webinar, Real Talk about real-time marketing. We've got Arby's, USTA, and Spreadfast, and of course myself will be your moderator. I'm looking forward to that. And so thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you again on another Social Media Today webinar. Thanks for joining. Bye now.